there. People went in the house with the bodies in there. The next morning, even, they hadn't cleaned up the scene, and there's one of the reasons, I was saying you can just about take moment by moment with this one 12-year-old boy. His family came, and they went inside the house the morning after the murders before the blood was even cleaned up or anything. And my father interviewed him, and just an amazing amount of detail that he remembered about seeing the murder scene. And so things weren't handled the same back then as they are now. They weren't documented in the same way. People weren't kept away in the same way. It's just amazing, the difference. And then, I kept trying to find where were the records? Wasn't there something left that the police, or not police, but the sheriff's department had documented about it? Never could find anything. Going to the archives in Raleigh, the state capitol, we went multiple times looking for things, and I finally found out that really the custom was that when one sheriff left office, pretty much most of his records on things were just discarded, and it left almost nothing of like a written record of anything. And the only thing really left that you could get a hold of was the death certificates, and even they are a little bit problematic, because I think the doctor, and this doctor shows up a lot in the book in different various and sundry things as the area doctor, and I think he may have been a person who drank a lot. He was maybe not an alcoholic, but he may have been impaired with alcohol at times and things he did. Even the documentation where he did the death certificates, he didn't do them till a month or so after the bodies were buried, and there's things that just don't seem to make sense. So there's just not, things just weren't handled the same as they are in modern day times.
Earlier I made a comment that maybe it's not the most well-known, tragedy that's happened, but I think in a way that it's almost got an urban legend quality to it, because I think stories are told all the time about somebody that sits down and, has Thanksgiving dinner, and it doesn't have to be Thanksgiving, it could just be dinner, and the father steps away from the table, and then he does something horrific to his family. And this is kind of, really, I guess, in a lot of ways, you could kind of trace the mythology of something like that to this very thing.
Well, and it's hard to really get for North Carolina in this area, this is a pretty well-known murder and has been all this time. And, people buy books from me from everywhere. A lot of times I don't know what their connection is, but all across the United States, into the United Kingdom, there's just a lot of interest in in this particular story, and it's kind of handed down from generation to generation that people would talk about it, and many people will tell me, well, my grandmother or my grandfather told me about this story, and so it's kind of like it has a legend feel to it, and also the fact that this house was a tourist attraction, during the Depression. And that added to the story and the mystique that people, and many, many people went through this house back then, more than you might think. They said sometimes there was hundreds of cars down in that field below the house, like on a Sunday afternoon, with people touring it. And in the book, there's even a story, it's very, you see so much about John Dillinger, but evidently John Dillinger visited the house. I have a little story in there about him being there, and it actually was that first person my father interviewed, Hillary Hampton, when he was a deputy sheriff. John Dillinger, evidently, he and his crew, when they came down from up north down to Florida, they evidently went through and toured the Lawson murder scene, walked right past Hillhampton who was sitting there as a deputy sheriff, and then later went back to his house and left a note on the door. It said, "I walked right past you today, and you didn't even recognize me." It was signed John Dillinger. So that's not even known about John Dillinger, but it comes out in this story. It's kind of interesting.
So it's got its roots in a lot of other stories, too, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even that little piece of John Dillinger history is embedded there, and people who follow his story really don't realize it, that he evidently did stop there on the way down, right, and this was probably like within the year when he got killed. So there's just a lot of little details that when you pull it all together, it makes a real fascinating look at a very unbelievable, almost unbelievable murder. With Charlie Lawson, evidently wanting to, I think he knew that this was going to make his family famous, and he bought them all new clothes, and 2 weeks before the murders, he took them into Winston-Salem to a professional photographer and had that portrait done of them. And it's a snapshot in time of them, just right before being murdered. So that kind of adds to the mystique, too.
You're so good because you just literally went to the next thing I was going to ask about. That portrait, it is, and I don't say this in obviously a positive way, but it's iconic because when you look up this is the first thing that pops up, and it's kind of sewn into history. It just seems like it's just there, and it's the type of thing that represents so many things, but there's an evil to it too. And I can't really describe it, but anybody that kind of understands art on any level, I'm sure would know what I'm talking about. And anybody who's seen the portrait, which it's up on our website, and I believe probably up on your website as well, it's chilling. That would be the word I would use.
I like the word chilling and haunting. We were privileged to see, I don't know if you realize how good those cameras were back in time. Those, where it took a second to do the exposure. And when the pictures were sold at the house, the packet of pictures, and there's still some of those originals around, and it took my father a while, but he ended up getting a packet of them that someone had that was sold at the house, when it was a tourist attraction. And when you put a magnifying glass on that picture, when it's off of the original negative, you can just about count their eyelashes, and you can see the stubble in his beard, and you can really see the expression. It's almost like looking at them being alive. How detailed it is, and they're very haunting. You can look into their eyes in one of those original pictures, and you almost see the sadness or that something was wrong in the family when you look in each person's eyes.
Yeah, it's very true, and there's almost a deadness to it, and that may have just been, I don't know, a lot of those portraits, those old-timey portraits kind of feel that way. But if anybody's ever seen the movie The Others, there's pictures, or there's supposed to be pictures of a time when people would actually take pictures of, dead bodies after they died in some sort of a natural position. And that's what it feels like to look at that picture. I mean, kind of in a way, that's what it became. But, I mean, do you get that feeling, too, when you look at it?
Yeah, it's just very haunting to look into their eyes and to look at all the detail that's there. It's almost like they would take a breath when you're looking at the original shot of it. And also, the pictures that were sold, one of them was a picture of the murder scene, with he had taken them all carefully and gotten each one of them's pillow and put their heads on the pillow and crossed their arms and laid them out, before leaving the house, before going out into the woods to kill himself, and that was kind of chilling too. But there's just little details, like there was a gentleman, his name was William Gomer Burroughs, and he was interviewed. Most of these people now have finally passed because of the age. But we got to speak to several people, and they were older, much older, but still, we interviewed them. And he was in the house with the bodies that evening after it got dark, and he tells of pulling a match across the floor because he couldn't see, and he pulls a match across the floor and realizes he's standing in between the bodies of two of the little girls. And he said he almost stepped on them, and it was just so terrible, striking that match, and then that scene comes up, with him standing there. And there's just so much detail that people told, shoveling the blood up, it was coagulated, and, trying to clean the house out. And it's just amazing the detail that some of these people still had. And then, of course, there's the scandal in it that's very controversial, that one of the things behind this was that the murderer was, his daughter was pregnant by him. And that came up, when we first started, we didn't know anything about that we had no idea. And then this rumor started coming up, and, with him interviewing people. Some people wouldn't talk about it, excuse me, and some people began to say that was, in the mix there. And I first thought, well, surely that's not it, surely that wouldn't have anything to do with it, and that wouldn't be true. But it ended up, and we didn't even know this for the first book. We put it in there because the murderer's niece came forward finally and said that she really knew that was part of what was going on. And we put it in the end of White Christmas, Bloody Christmas, the first book. And then later, after that book came out in 1992, my father was able to interview an elderly lady in the nursing home that had been Marie's best friend, the daughter that was supposedly pregnant by her father. And she confirmed it, that they spent the night together 2 weeks before the murder, about the time that photograph was taken. And that Marie had shared with her what was going on and told him about the conversation they had that night. And so now when people say they really don't think that that's true, and I still can't say that I know it's true, but we know what we were told. And we felt like the lady was very credible. We knew who she was, and her name was Ella Mae Johnson at the time. We didn't publish her married name because we didn't know how, the public would maybe accost her or her family. But her real name at the time was Ella Mae Johnson. And so she was a little bit younger, Marie, her best friend. They spent the night after school, and Marie broke down crying and telling her, that she had conceived a child, and her father was the father of the child. And people say, well, that was the main thing or whatever. I don't know that it was the main thing. He had so much going on. I'm sure that came into it, but there was a lot going on for Charlie Lawson. And so
it's interesting. Yeah, there's just so many facets to it. One of the things, and I know you'd probably get to this on your own without me even bringing it up, but when we talk about theories and things like that, one of the things, of course, I came across in my research was the mob connection. I don't know if that was a sign of the times or just some sort of, people just throwing out crazy theories. What do you think of that?
I think that's pretty ridiculous. And where it comes from is, and I know pretty much where this started, the mob theory comes from the fact that White Christmas, Bloody Christmas brought up the John Dillinger story. And people kind of grabbed on that. Well, then John Dillinger did it. But and I addressed that in The Meaning of Our Tears when I rewrote it. John Dillinger was incarcerated at the time of the murders. he could not have killed them. Even if he had been there, he wouldn't have done that. I mean, if you know